On my 22nd birthday, my grandmother didn't sing, didn't toast, didn't even smile. She just fixed me with that sharp, unreadable look she'd perfected over decades of boardrooms and backroom deals, then said calmly, "For your birthday, I bought you a hotel, valued at $36 million." I laughed, loudly, because people don't say things like that unless they're joking or unhinged. Then she slid a dark leather folder across the white linen table. Inside was a deed, not a copy, the real one. The property name, the Verdant House, typed neatly across the top. Brooklyn Heights, my name already printed on every signature line. Valuation complete, transfer date set for midnight. At 12, she said, sipping her wine, it's legally yours. No partners, no trustees, no excuses. And don't thank me, just don't be stupid. I'm Lena Walsh, and somewhere between my last bite of birthday cake and the check arriving, I went from a freshly unemployed NYU graduate to the sole owner of one of the most recognizable boutique hotels in Brooklyn. As if that weren't enough, my grandmother leaned in slightly and added, "Your mother doesn't know yet. I wanted you to hear it from me first." That should have been my warning. By the time I got back to the Manhattan penthouse I'd grown up in, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Missed calls, voicemails, texts piling up faster than I could read them. Every light in the apartment was blazing like an interrogation room. My mother stood in the living room in a designer dress she'd clearly chosen for effect. Perfect makeup, perfect posture. Her new husband, planted beside her like a hired muscle, didn't bother hiding his satisfaction. They already knew. They talked about legacy, about family assets, about how overwhelming ownership could be for someone my age. They said they wanted to help, step in, manage things together. When I said, calmly, "No, I'm the sole owner, that's not changing," my mother's face went blank. "Then pack your things and leave, tonight." No raised voice, no argument, just a verdict. 10 minutes later, I was throwing my life into 2 suitcases, hands shaking, heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. That's when my grandmother appeared in my doorway, watching like she'd seen this scene play out before. "Well," she said dryly, "that escalated exactly as expected." "You knew she'd do this?" I asked. "I knew she'd choose comfort over you if someone clever enough pushed her, and Daniel Cross is very good at pushing." She placed her bag on my bed and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were bank records from offshore accounts, wire transfers labeled consulting fees, internal emails. One subject line stopped my breath cold. Verdant House, Acquisition Roadmap. The emails laid it out cleanly. Once I inherited the hotel, the plan was to pressure me into signing over management, restructure operations, sell off key assets, and eventually unlock redevelopment value. Daniel's name sat neatly at the bottom of every page. "He married your mother for this, not for her, for the land, for you." By morning, I was in her guest room staring at the envelope like it might bite me. At 7:30 a.m., my phone rang again. "Lena," my mother said, voice thin and unfamiliar, "we need to talk, alone. Meet me by Central Park. No Daniel." An hour later, she sat across from me at a cafe, sunglasses hiding eyes that looked wrecked even without makeup. "He's been watching you," she whispered, "for a year." She handed me an iPad. Inside were surveillance notes, photos taken from across streets, screenshots of my bank activity, logs of where I went, who I met, how long I stayed, even records from my freshman dorm days. "He targeted you because of the hotel," she said, "before we ever met." Then I saw the prenup. One clause, highlighted repeatedly, spelled it out. If the marriage ended within 2 years and Daniel could claim financial harm, he could pursue compensation tied to family assets, including inheritances acquired during the marriage. The hotel had transferred to me 3 days earlier. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Daniel.
Tell your mother she's terrible at hiding things. Breakfast tomorrow. Verdant rooftop. Just you and me." That was the moment I stopped being afraid. The next morning, I met him. He didn't deny anything. Not the surveillance, not the shell companies, not the plan. He offered me a deal. I keep my name on paper. He takes operational control. I get appearances. He gets power. When I refused, he threatened court, asset freezes, judges, slow financial suffocation. So I recorded everything. What he didn't count on was my grandmother, or the neighbors, or journalists who love a good story about predatory development, or federal agents who'd been waiting for someone like him to make one mistake too many. Within weeks, the narrative collapsed. Daniel was arrested at JFK trying to flee. His backers vanished. The court removed his company from the hotel. Control was returned to me. I stood in the lobby the day it became official, watching staff breathe again. My grandmother rested her hand on my shoulder. "You didn't just keep the hotel," she said. "You learned when to fight." She was right. What I inherited wasn't just a building. It was the knowledge that I could be underestimated, outmaneuvered, even temporarily overruled, and still win without becoming like the people who tried to break me. That's the legacy I'm protecting now.
The first thing Daniel Cross did once the judge granted temporary oversight was show up at the Verdant house like he'd always belonged there. Clipboard in hand, tailored suit, two unfamiliar men flanking him who scanned the lobby like they were assessing threats instead of admiring the marble floors. "Ms. Walsh," he said pleasantly, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of a quiet war. "Per the court's order, my firm will be assuming interim operational management. You're welcome to remain involved in an advisory role." Advisory. The word tasted like dust. "This is still my hotel," I said evenly. "My name is still on the deed." Daniel smiled. "Of course, we're just here to protect the asset while emotions settle." Behind him, my grandmother's longtime staff watched in silence, unsure whether to look at him or me. That was the moment I understood what he was really doing. He wasn't stealing the hotel outright. He was rotting it from the inside. Within days, the changes started. Longtime vendors were abruptly dropped and replaced with companies I'd never heard of, more expensive, less reliable, and somehow all connected back to Daniel's network. Housekeeping shifts were cut, front desk staff were ordered to push premium upgrades aggressively or risk termination. Guest complaints followed, slowly at first, then all at once. "It doesn't feel like it used to," one repeat guest told me quietly in the lobby. "It's colder now." That night, I paced my grandmother's dining room while she calmly read through another stack of documents. "He's destabilizing the numbers," I said. "If occupancy drops, he'll tell the judge I'm too inexperienced to own it." She nodded once. "That's exactly the argument he plans to make." Then she slid a new file toward me. "These," she said, "are why he's going to lose." Inside were reports from Florida, New Jersey, Miami. A strip mall fire right before an insurance payout, a warehouse electrical failure after a refused buyout, a hotel plagued with safety violations until the owners sold at half value. Different properties, same pattern, and always buried in the background, the same two names, Daniel Cross and the same security consultancy he'd hired to pressure my neighbors. "He doesn't invent tactics, he repeats them," my grandmother said. The next morning, the first neighbor walked into the Verdant house shaking. Her name was Ruth Calder. She owned the bookstore on the corner, a place that hosted readings longer than I'd been alive. She clutched a canvas tote filled with photos. Black SUVs parked across from her shop, anonymous texts warning her grandson not to walk home alone, a police report that went nowhere. "They keep saying it's time to sell," she whispered, "that the neighborhood is changing." 2 days later, the owner of the yoga studio showed me security footage of masked men tampering with her locks at 2:47 a.m. Then the cafe inspections, surprise visits, no business cards, pressure disguised as coincidence. By the end of the week, my grandmother's dining table looked like a crime scene collage. Texts, photos, recordings, bank transfers, and right in the center, Daniel's recorded voice from the rooftop breakfast. "Judges love freezing assets. You'll come back to me."
When the federal agent finally reviewed it all, he didn't hide his interest. "We've been circling these guys for years," he admitted. "Your stepfather made it easy." While law enforcement built quietly, we moved publicly. I gave interviews, not accusations, stories, about inheriting a hotel at 22, about being kicked out of my home for refusing to give it away, about a powerful man insisting he knew better than the woman whose name was on the deed. The articles didn't call Daniel a criminal. They didn't have to. Social media did the rest. My video from the Verdant rooftop crossed 1 million views in a day. People stitched it, debated it, dug into Daniel's past, old lawsuits resurfaced, photos connected him to developers now under investigation. Investors backed away. Banks paused. City officials started asking questions. Daniel noticed. His lawyers called, then emailed, then called again. Before any deals could be renegotiated, 2 federal agents stopped him at a private terminal at JFK. The charges weren't just about me. They were about years of coercion, fraud, and intimidation. By the time the news broke, the court had already moved. Daniel's company was removed, the prenup frozen, full operational control of the Verdant house returned to me. The morning it became official, I stood in the lobby watching staff smile again, really smile, for the first time in weeks. My grandmother leaned close and said, "He thought control was power. He forgot reputation lasts longer." And for the first time since my birthday, I believed her.
Daniel Cross's arrest didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet. No cheering headlines on my end, no dramatic moment where everything snapped back into place. Just a slow, almost cautious return of control. Paperwork signed, court orders updated, and one final email confirming that the Verdant house was, once again, fully mine. The staff felt it before I did. People stopped whispering in the hallways. The tension that had lived behind the front desk finally dissolved. Longtime vendors called, unsure whether it was safe to come back. I told them yes, and apologized for what they'd been dragged into. My grandmother watched all of this from a distance, arms folded, expression unreadable. "She underestimated endurance," she said one night on the rooftop. "Men like him always think fear works forever." A week later, my mother asked to see me. Not at the penthouse, not anywhere polished, a small cafe in Greenwich Village, the kind she used to dismiss as invisible. She showed up without makeup, no heels, just jeans, a sweater, and a nervous habit of stirring her coffee too much. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just need you to know I see it now." She talked about therapy, about mistaking control for safety, about believing being chosen by a powerful man meant being protected. "I chose him over you," she admitted, "and I don't know how to live with that yet." I didn't soften the truth. I said, "You kicked me out. You tried to force me to give up something Grandma built for me. That doesn't disappear because he turned out to be worse than you thought." She nodded, didn't argue, didn't cry. So I gave her what I could. Not absolution, but time. We started with weekly coffees, nothing big. Sometimes silence, sometimes talk about nothing that mattered. She visited the hotel occasionally, not as a manager, not as family authority, but as a guest who sat in the lobby and watched the world move past her. The hotel changed too. I hired a general manager who believed hospitality wasn't a spreadsheet. I brought back the vendors Daniel cut. We hosted bookstore readings in the courtyard, gave neighborhood businesses discounted room blocks, opened the rooftop for community fundraisers instead of private investor dinners. The Verdant house stopped feeling like a trophy. It became a place again. 6 months after Daniel's sentencing, my grandmother and I stood on the rooftop watching the river lights shimmer below. "I didn't leave you this hotel to test if you could keep it. I left it to see if you'd know when to fight." I thought about the girl at that birthday dinner, laughing because she didn't believe she deserved something that big. That girl would have handed the keys over just to keep the peace. I wasn't her anymore. The lesson wasn't that money corrupts or that family always betrays you. It was simpler. Love without boundaries is an invitation. Silence is permission. And saying no
especially to people who raised you, can be the most powerful kind of self-respect. My grandmother gave me a $36 million hotel. Daniel Cross tried to take it. In the end, what I kept wasn't just brick and land. I kept my voice, my agency, and the certainty that being underestimated doesn't mean being powerless. That's the part of the legacy I plan on protecting.